Hello everyone, welcome to SB Analysis, a new series I'm starting where I'll be reviewing and ranking the qualities of certain species from the point of view of wildlife photography. Today's episode will be the common birds of prey in Alabama. The categories I'll be reviewing are appearance, which is the colors, patterns, shapes, and sizes of the animals, their behavior, especially in regards to capturing it on camera, so how easy it is to see them doing something interesting. Their encounter rate, which is their numbers and locations and how easy it is to find them. The reception, which is when you post the pictures online, how well fans of your work seem to react to them. And then kind of giving them just an overall score. These are the scores I'm going to be giving out to the different qualities. So if an animal has really nice colors, it's going to get an A. If it's just average, it'll get a C. And I don't expect there will be many Fs. Let's start this analysis off with the sharp-shinned hawk, the smallest hawk in Alabama. For appearance, I'm going to give the sharp-shinned hawk a rating of C. Well, it is a very pretty hawk with a kind of bluish gray back and white and orange barring on the chest. It is on the small side and its proportions are kind of funny. It has a very tiny head and it is compared with the next hawk we'll talk about, which is slightly more impressive. Moving on to behaviors, unfortunately the sharp-shinned hawk is going to be getting a D. This bird tends to be fairly secretive and remain in kind of dense woodlands. And when you do see it, it's usually very briefly as it bursts out of the woods, grabs a little bird, and then flies back into the woods. So it's very difficult to capture action with this bird. The sharp-shinned hawk is going to get an encounter rate of C. While not a rare species, they are fairly secretive, often remaining in the woods. So it's very difficult to target this species. You kind of just stumble upon them rather than going out and looking for them. As for audience reception, I'm giving the sharp-shinned hawk a score of B. No bird of prey is really going to get a bad score in audience reception, but being kind of small and kind of a little funny looking with their tiny little heads, these guys don't rank quite as highly as some of the other ones, but they're still well liked by audiences. So overall, the sharp-shinned hawk gets a score of C. They are lovely little birds, kind of difficult to find and difficult to get some good action shots of them, so they get an average score. Up next we'll be discussing a very similar hawk, the Cooper's hawk. For appearance, the Cooper's hawk gets a score of B. It is very similar in appearance to the sharp-shinned hawk, but it is bigger, it's bulkier, its head is more kind of blocky, so it's just overall more impressive. So its score is a bit higher. For behavior, the Cooper's hawk gets a score of C. This hawk is a lot less secretive than the sharp-shinned hawk, so you'll see it perched out in the open, and it'll occasionally do some pretty close flybys, so it's easy to get this bird in flight, which gives it a slightly higher score. For an encounter score, the Cooper's hawk gets a B. While it is still difficult to go out and kind of target this bird, they do seem to be more numerous than the sharp-shinned hawks, and being less shy, they're more visible when you do see them. For audience reception, the Cooper's hawk gets a score of B. Being so similar to the sharp-shinned hawk, they have a similar audience reception. These guys might edge out the sharp-shinned just a tiny bit because they're a bit more impressive size-wise, but it's minimal. So overall, this bird gets a score of a B-. Their more impressive proportions and their bolder nature give them the edge over the sharp-shinned hawk, so they get a slightly higher score. Moving on, we have the broad-winged hawk. The broad-winged gets an appearance score of C. It is a fairly small drab hawk. It does have some nice barring on its chest and on its tail, but compared to some of the other species we'll talk about, it's kind of lacks a pop of color. For behavior score, I'm going to give the broadwing a score of C. In general, this is a bird you're just going to see sitting on a power line as you drive down the road. You do occasionally catch them in flight, but most often you're going to just see them perched on a power line. For an encounter score, I'm going to give the broadwing a B. Broadwings can be fairly common here during the summer, and in migration you'll occasionally see large groups of them all flying together. For audience reception, broadwings are going to get a B. Being a bird of prey, people really like these guys, but nothing really makes them stand out from the others. So for an overall score, broadwing hawks are going to get a C+. While being fairly easy to find and photograph, their kind of drab colors hold them back just a little bit. Now let's move on to the red-shouldered hawk. For an appearance score, the red-shouldered hawk gets a B. These hawks are quite good looking. They have a very rusty red chest, and their wings have a lot of black and white barring, which is really contrasty and nice when you see them in flight. For behavior, the red shoulder is getting a score of B. Like the broadwing, this is a bird you'll often see just sitting on a power line as you drive down the road, but these guys are slightly different in that they call a lot. They're very vocal. They will fly around just screaming and screaming and screaming. In fact, there's one outside right now doing just that. This lets you get photos of them with their mouth open, which is slightly more interesting than just a bird sitting there. For an encounter score, the red shoulder gets a score of A. This is one of the most common birds of prey in the state. It's usually no problem finding one, and these are even easier than some of the other really common ones because they're so vocal. For a reception score, the red shoulder gets a B. I honestly think these birds would be more well received if they were slightly less common. I think people just are used to seeing them, but they are very good looking and people do like them, but they get overshadowed by some of the rarer birds. So overall, the red-shouldered hawk gets a score of a B+. This is a very easy to find, easy to photograph, good looking bird, a very good bird to practice your photography on, and people will like seeing it. Sticking with the red theme, up next we have the red-tailed hawk. For an appearance score, the red-tailed hawk gets a score of a B+. While they are slightly more drab than the red-shouldered hawk, having less red on the chest and more cream-colored, they do have a nice shock of red on the tail, obviously. But these guys also have a lot of variability. You can find different patterns, different color morphs, so it's kind of fun to find red tails that look different from each other. For behavior score, red tails get a C. Like the broadwing and red-shouldered hawk, these guys mostly just hang out on power lines. You will see these guys soaring a bit more often, but most of the time they'll just be sitting there, and they're not quite as vocal as the red-shouldered hawks. For an encounter rate, these guys get an A. These hawks are in competition with the red shoulder as being the most common hawk in the state. For a reception score, red tails get a score of B. Like the red shoulder, I think these guys are held back a little bit by how common they are. Red shoulders are probably slightly better received unless you get like a cool variation or morph of a red tail, and then it bumps them up a little bit. So for an overall score, the red-tailed hawk gets a B. A lot like the red shoulder, the red tail is a great starter bird of prey for photography. You'll have no trouble finding them, and it's fairly easy to photograph them. Getting into some of the more unique hawks, up next we have the northern harrier. For an appearance score, the northern harrier gets an A. These hawks have quite a unique appearance. They kind of look like a hawk mixed with an owl. They have a very disc-shaped face, quite unique and quite striking. Adult males are also very beautiful, being very light gray. People call them gray ghosts. For behavior, they also get an A. It's rare to see a northern harrier perched. They are usually just flying low and slow over a field. They'll often hover, giving you great opportunities to catch them in flight. and it's not rare to see them drop down on a prey item, so it's quite exciting watching them. And it's also relaxing because of how kind of slow and methodical they are. For an encounter rate, the Northern Harrier gets a C. These hawks are cold weather visitors, and they're not exactly rare, but they require very specific habitat to find them. They need open fields with kind of tall grass. So if you have that habitat around, you'll probably see them, but if not, you'll have to make a drive to look for them. For reception score, Northern Harriers get a B+. Thanks to their unique appearance and the fact that most of the shots you'll get of them are action shots, people tend to really like these. This gives the Northern Harrier an overall score of B. Being probably the most unique hawk on this list, the Northern Harrier is quite a fantastic bird. People really like them, and they're great to watch and photograph. Moving away from hawks and onto kites, the next bird is the Mississippi kite. The Mississippi kite gets an appearance score of B. These birds are kind of a light gray color, which is quite nice looking. Unfortunately, in bad lighting, they get all shadowy and you lose most of that color, so you need good lighting for these guys to look nice. For a behavior score, these guys get an A. Kites are just amazing flyers. It's fantastic to watch them. They can change elevations in an instant, and they swoop down right over the ground to grab beetles and other insects to eat on the wing, so a lot of the times you'll see them, they'll be doing some kind of neat action. Also, if you're lucky enough to find a farmer mowing his field, often that'll draw tons of these guys in, so you'll see a whole bunch of them just swooping down and catching bugs and flying around, and it's just fantastic. Mississippi kites get an encounter score of B. If you find the right spot at the right time, you can find just a sky full of these guys, but they'll also just show up in random places, so you can really just see them anywhere. For reception score, the Mississippi kite gets a B. People really seem to like kites, and it's easy to get good action shots. Unfortunately, Mississippi kites tend to get a little overshadowed by our next bird. Overall, the Mississippi kite gets a B+. This is just a fantastic bird of prey to watch and photograph. Very subtle colors, but nice looking, great behaviors. They're just a little bit overshadowed by their cousins, the swallowtailed kite. Unsurprisingly, the swallowtailed kite gets an appearance score of A+. These birds are not only probably the best looking bird of prey in the state, but one of the best looking birds in general. They have bright white undersides, iridescent black wings and tail, and just a super unique shape. For behavior, the swallowtail kite gets a score of A. Like the Mississippi kite, these guys are just a joy to watch. They are so graceful and fast, and they make amazing attack runs on bugs right above the ground. Just incredible to see. For an encounter score, the swallowtail kite gets a C. Their one lower score. Swallowtail kites can be slightly harder to find than Mississippi kites. They are more concentrated in the lower half of the state, and they don't wander as much as the Mississippi kite. But if you find them in the right spot at the right time, you can find a good number of them. Swallowtail kites obviously get a reception score of A. It's not difficult to tell why. They have a great silhouette, great colors, great behaviors, a lot of action shots with these guys. So overall, the swallowtail kite gets a score of an A-. If they were just a little more common, a little more widespread, this bird would be straight A's across the board. That's it for our common kite species. Now we're going to be moving on to falcons, starting with the American kestrel. The American kestrel gets an appearance score of A. This little falcon is probably the most colorful bird of prey in the United States. The males have blue and orange and white, and they have nice black facial markings, and they're just very good looking. As for a behavior score, the American Kestrel gets a score of C. Unfortunately, these beautiful little falcons are the quintessential power pole bird. It's very rare that you don't see them sitting on a power line, and when you get close to them, they tend to just fly to the next closest power line. For an encounter score, the American Kestrel gets an A. These birds are quite common anywhere there's good open habitat for them to hunt, and in the northern part of the state, they are incredibly common. You can see over a dozen of them a day. Not hard to believe, but for reception, the American Kestrel gets an A. People seem to really like falcons and really like color, and the American Kestrel has both of those qualities. All this gives the American Kestrel an overall score of B. They got the looks, they got the numbers, and people really like them. Unfortunately, they're just a little boring, just sitting on power lines all day. Up next, we got a mid-size falcon in the form of the Merlin. For appearance, the Merlin gets a score of B. While not as colorful as the Kestrel and not quite as iconic as our next falcon, the Merlin is a handsome bird with a nice slate-colored back and nice patterning on the chest. For a behavior score, the Merlin gets a C. While it's surprisingly common to see these birds hunt, it is so blazingly fast that it's almost impossible to catch it on camera. So more often than not, you're just going to see them perching. For an encounter score, the Merlin unfortunately gets a D. The Merlin is the hardest to find falcon in the state, and is probably the least reported bird on this list. The Merlin gets a reception score of B. I find this to be slightly unjust, but the Merlin just seems to be outcompeted by the colorful American Kestrel and the next bird, which is quite iconic. This gives the Merlin an overall score of C. It being the middle child of the Alabama Falcons and being quite hard to find kind of knocks it down, but it is a very cool bird. This brings us to one of the most iconic birds on the list, the peregrine falcon. This falcon gets an appearance score of A. Peregrine falcons are just the quintessential falcon. They have great slate-colored backs and so much pattern on the underside of their wings and tail and chest. For behavior, the peregrine falcon gets a B. While touted as the fastest bird in the world, I find peregrine falcons much easier to track than merlins. They're larger and kind of have a slower flight until they're in attack mode. For an encounter score, I'm giving the peregrine falcon a C. This bird doesn't have as big of a population as some of the others, but it seems like all the nest sites of these birds are well documented and known by a lot of birders. So it's easy to track one down if you want to see one. For a reception score, the peregrine falcon obviously gets an A. This bird is a world record holder in the animal kingdom, so everyone is enamored by it. This gives the peregrine falcon an overall score of B. Really, the only thing holding this falcon back is that unless you're lucky enough to live near a nesting site, you're probably going to have to travel a little bit to find one. Up next, we have a unique species, the osprey. The osprey gets an appearance score of A. This bird has some great contrast with its dark brown and white feathering, and it has some really lovely patterns on its wings, tail, and head. Where the osprey really shines is in behavior, where it gets an A+. Probably no bird is easier to see hunting than an osprey, and its hunts are just a sight to behold as it plummets out of the sky, diving into the water to grab fish, and then flying off with a big fish in its talons. It's a really cool sight to see. For an encounter score, the osprey gets an A. These birds are quite numerous and common. Most bridges have a nest on them. There's nesting platforms kind of all over the state, wherever there's water, and you'll often just see them anytime you're near any sizable body of water. As for reception, the osprey gets a B+. The only reason the osprey doesn't get an A is because so many photographers love to photograph these birds, so there's just a mass of images of them online, so sometimes osprey photos get lost in the bundle. This does, however, give the osprey a perfect score of A. Ospreys are just one of the easiest birds to get amazing action shots of, so they're really great birds to photograph. This brings us to probably the fan favorite bird, the bald eagle. A lot of you may disagree with me, but I'm going to give the bald eagle an appearance score of a B+. The only reason the bald eagle isn't getting a full A from me is because it lacks any kind of pattern. It's just block colors, which looks nice, but is a little plain. It is impressive in size, and it's got very heavy proportions, which is nice. For behavior, the bald eagle gets an A. Being a hunter of aquatic prey, like the osprey, the bald eagle is kind of reliable in its hunting behavior, so you can catch it skimming the water, grabbing a fish, which is pretty exciting. For an encounter score, the bald eagle gets a B. Bald eagles can be found at many large bodies of water, and it's not terribly uncommon to see them just flying over or even on the road just when you're driving around. For a reception score, the bald eagle no doubt gets an A+. Being the national bird, even non-birders love this eagle because it's just the symbol of the country, and it is a large, majestic looking creature. This, in my opinion, puts the bald eagle just a hair below the osprey with an A-. The osprey's patterning and its numbers and its slightly more reliable hunting behaviors makes it eke out the win over the bald eagle, but just barely. And that's all the common birds of prey of Alabama. The top 3 birds of prey, in my opinion, based on this analysis, are, with an A-, the swallow-tailed kite, also with an A-, the bald eagle, and the only bird to score a perfect A, the osprey. I hope you enjoyed this little analysis. Comment below what your favorite bird of prey is, and if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. I'll see you next time.